Potato chip quilts. Very, very popular. All the rage the last few years, ever since Brenda from Mount Scrapmore, Tackling Mount Scrapmore with Brenda, I think is the name of the channel, basically told all of us in the YouTube community about potato chip quilt. Now, of course, these are not an entirely new concept. They've actually been around for decades. But I don't know if Brenda came up with the concept of calling them potato chips, or if that was something that was previously called that way. It's not an entirely new concept, but it is kind of a newer concept for the YouTube crowd. A lot of the potato chips that I've seen are all basically some variation of courthouse steps, which courthouse steps is considered to be a variation of log cabin. So it's no wonder why these things are very, very popular, because the log cabin and the courthouse steps have been designs that have been popular for well over a century. I have a different take on a potato chip pattern, and I think you're going to love it. So, of course, potato chips, they start off with the individual chips, and those individual chips are conventionally 2.5 by 4.5. And so here is a scrap. I'm just going to cut this down to get my 2.5 by 4.5. Just like that. They are also conventionally a pattern that utilizes scrap, so it's a great scrap buster. And for mine, I'm going with a blue and white type of a palette. So I have a big stack of blue, and then I have a smaller stack of whites or off-whites. And really, when I say white, I'm meaning white, cream, off-white. This can also be the pastel blue as well. And so within this, I can already see that some of these are definitely more of a pastel color. So I am going to put those that I come across into this light pile. So let's see. Yeah, I think this one's more of a light color. Let's see, this one's definitely a light color. And so the reason why I'm going through and I'm sorting this way is just to make it so that it's a little bit more organized, so that when I get started on this quilt, I can just hit the ground running with it. All right, so now I've gone through, I have a whole bunch of these blues that counted as more of kind of a light, I think. And so I'm just going to kind of shuffle these around into the middle of these whites just to kind of give it a little bit of variety, because I want to make it so that when I'm going here with my layout, I can just keep going. So I have a pattern here where it's going to utilize these potato chips perfectly, and it also happens to be a pretty popular pattern in its own right, and that is what is called a braid. A braid, it's just very simple. You can just basically stack them that way and go ahead and put like a light color there, and you just keep building the braid. So that's really like the big thing we're doing here. So I'm going to put that one there. That one there. And I'm going to need quite a lot of these actually. So I'm going to keep, oops, there, okay. So you want to make sure with these braids that you do have them going like this, and you're just building them that way, and then that one, that one, that one, that one. Because it's real easy to kind of get messed up, especially if you're shifting things around and then go like that, and then that's not really going to be a functional braid there. Right there, I think another one of those light blues. So what I want to do for this is I want to just keep building this out. I think from what I was calculating, I might need about 30 of these. So for this first one, I'm going to try to do 30. You definitely want to have it be an even number that you end on. And I'll go into that later because that plays into how I'm able to make this a continuous braid without having to have any kind of a setting thing in the bottom or the top. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep building this out. And then when I start sewing, I'm going to take the first two pieces and I will start sewing on those. So to sew these, you want to do a partial seam. And so it's going to be a partial seam right there. And that's how you start off each one of these braids. I'm just going to put that right there. And then I set my stitch length pretty small. And then just back tack at the end. And then that right there. For this, I want to go ahead and just do a little bit of a finger press this way because I'm going to finger press everything kind of going forward. So just do a little bit of a finger press that way. And then the rest of it is pretty easy. I can just take my next chip and I just line it up there, and I just make sure that I'm lining it up against this sort of an edge here where in the middle of it is a seam. Okay, let's see. I think I'm going to flip it over to do it this way. And then I'm going to go ahead and just press that outward so I'm not fighting against those seams. So in that way, I'm just, like I said, I'm pressing everything towards the front of that. And then I can add my next chip right here, and I can just keep going like that. So I have that braid all nice and put together. I have 30 pieces, which is just right for what I'm trying to do. I want to give it a little bit of a press. I'm going to do more of a press later after I've done all of my trimming on the next step after this. But I want to do a little bit of a press right now, so let me go ahead and do that. So I've actually gone through and I've done some pressing, and I need to still do some pressing right here. So okay, now this, I need a serious iron for this, folks. Now that's an iron. Now what you want to do with this, because these are at a diagonal, if you go straight this way, that's actually the bias. So you want to go where you're ironing towards the grain of the fabric. So grain or cross grain, however you want to think of it, that way. And then that way you're not going to have a problem with your bias. Okay, now we have this all nice and pressed out, at least the first bit of pressing that we do. We have these really, really weird pieces here. This one points out, this one's a big V. How are we going to get these to fit together? So I'm going to show you how. If you do it this way, this is just not going to fit. You're like, okay, what in the world? That's kind of a brain teaser. So what you want to do is you want to kind of treat this like sort of like a burrito, or I don't know, some sort of a thing where you would have it flat and you would kind of fold it, you know, like maybe a tri-fold type of a thing. And then right here, if you'll notice here, like I did actually have to remove some stitches because I realized in doing the other braids that it's really helpful if this partial seam is a little bit longer than it was. So I did make that out to about there. So you want to do your partial seam to maybe around 2/3 on that initial partial seam. So what we want to do is this long bit here will actually join up right here. And I can take this and I can just fold this back, and then I can just line that right up to the front there. And then I'm just going to go ahead and secure this middle seam here with a pin. All right. And then I can go ahead and just, you know, I could put it like this. And then at the sewing machine, since it kind of wants to do this sort of a thing where it sort of wants to go all boxy like that, which is fine, then I just kind of fold that back with my hand, and then I just take that and I line that up with the presser foot, and then I will go ahead and just sew this down just like I did joining any of those braid pieces on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So now I have that all joined together at that first step. So then it's really easy from there. You just go ahead and you just line it up, and you can stitch the other bit in it there. Definitely you want to go through and you want to like finger press this to the side. Okay. And then that way you have it all finger pressed just like on that other side, and everything is going to lay really, really nice and flat for this part of this really long braid block. And then I can just stitch that all the way to the end of that block, and that's taken care of. Now, alternatively, what you could do if you are horribly allergic to having partial seams is you can still get a pretty good result here. You're just going to need some 2.5-inch squares. And so what you'll do with the 2.5-inch squares is you will actually start with a 2.5-inch square, and then that first piece, you're going to sew that onto the 2.5-inch square, that leading edge, and then you'll press it away, and then you'll put on that second chip, and then just keep building the braid from there. And then when you get to the last piece here, then you'll just go ahead and put another 2.5-inch piece, and you'll put it right on the end here. Okay. And then that will make it so that everything can line up and you can go ahead and trim it. Or if you're comfortable trimming an extra amount off, then you'll probably end up trimming about, you'll end up trimming most of that off. Also, what you could do is you wouldn't have to have it be an even amount of chips. You could have an odd number of chips. So you could end it on this one that would be the odd number, and then you could put that last 2.5-inch square right here. That would work as well. But for this, I think it's really nice to be able to do something nice and continuous. And so the way that ends up looking is it ends up looking like these. It ends up being a tube. Basically what you want to do with this is you can kind of, you could kind of shift it around and decide like where you want to have it, but I don't really have any particular sorts of concerns that way. So right here is actually where I had the beginning and the end. What I could do is I could just put it right there if I wanted to. So, but whatever the case, just figure out where you want to have it. And so I guess that's as good a place as any. And then I like to just line up these little peaks together so that it's pretty straight, and lining up the peaks down below as well. Okay, so that's pretty straight. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give this area here a little bit of a press. All right, so we have a little bit of a press there. And then what you can do is you could take your ruler and you just line it up right with that very edge and just go whack. Or you can take scissors. Scissors work fine in this case. And so that's what I'm going to do. And I'm just going to cut that all the way. Okay. And then it's like that. And so now it's got this nice kind of continuous look on either side of this, which works very nicely. So right now I'm ready to trim this. The thing about this is that it's long enough that it will kind of have a tendency to sort of shift a little bit subtly back and forth. And so what I've found is that if I just make sure that I'm trimming it to the width that I need it to be, then that seems to work. Now, with these braids that are 2.5-inch wide logs for the braids, then basically whatever the length of that log is what you're going to end up trimming your braid to. And so in this case, it was 4.5 because these were chips. So I'm going to trim this to be 4.5 inches wide. And so if I look on my ruler here, I have basically that, and then this area is 4.5. And so it works pretty well because I can pretty much line up these little tips that are going down. And these tips are not absolutely perfect because I did have some variances that happened when I was sewing this. And also, again, like it will kind of do this sort of a shimmy type of a thing because I guess it's kind of floppy is really what I'm trying to say. So like right here is kind of an edge, but then it looks like it actually catches the 4.5 there, so that's fine. And so I'm just right now kind of eyeballing it and trying to make sure that I'm not having these little corner edges too far in. I'm okay with it being like 1/16 of an inch. That's all right. So I'm just starting that off, and then I can just take these little triangles. And these triangles are nice little triangles that you can save for other things. Like you could take a foundation strip of fabric and you could just start building your triangles that way and essentially make a strip of very scrappy fabric that would be really cool to use. You can also just kind of wad these up and stuff them into little stuffed animals, or like I have cats, so sometimes I make catnip toys for them. And so there's all kinds of uses for these. Also, if you like to do little confetti projects where you just kind of like put stuff down randomly and then fuse it in place, maybe put some tulle over it and stitch on it. So I like to save these. You could throw them away if that's your thing. It's your quilt, your way, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just advance this. And then I like to just leave enough so that I can kind of have something to sort of line up down below with the ruler. And then like I can already see here that I'm going to have to manipulate this piece a little bit. So I'm just going to do that. Just gonna gently tug on one of those edges, and then that will make it so that it still stays pretty nice and straight where I've already cut. And then I can continue going through, and if I see on my 4.5 line over here, everything is looking pretty good. So there we go. And now more triangles out of the way, and I am ready to trim the rest of this side. I'm going to line that up again and then see how everything lines up. So this is looking like it's really going far off that way. This is almost to 4.25. So I definitely want to try to just slip that direction a little bit, and then this will work pretty well. So all of that looks pretty good on that side. So we have a little bit of a thing here, kind of a hang-off thing. It's not too much to worry about because once we put these rows together, you won't even see it. That's in the seam. The big thing is just trying to make sure that you can have that consistent 4.5 inch wide to this strip. So now I can line up the 4.5 inch line. Now, absolutely, there is a way to do this braid where if you made these partial seams, then you could join them to the other seams. Personally, for me, I felt like that looked like a lot of extra work. And honestly, I just like the clean lines of the way these rows look whenever they're put together. But I do like joining the top and bottom that way so that you can conserve fabric. I think that's very nice. Okay. And there we go. So now I have a nicely trimmed braid there, and I have the other 3 of these all nice and trimmed. So now I can just kind of fit these together, see how I want to do them. So, and I think with this, it was something where because of how I had joined it, or actually where I cut it after I joined it, it meant that I was going to end up having these things kind of forming into an arrow like this. That just was kind of an accident that way. You can interpret it as a happy accident or not. I was shooting for this type of thing so that I wouldn't have to try to line up these points. And so now I'm going to have to line up points along a couple of row joins together and then the last row join. So it'll end up looking pretty cool. I mean, it'll look, I think, probably cooler than if I had done it the way that I thought it was going to turn out. You know, it's just kind of a choose your own adventure on that sort of thing. So once I have that figured out, I will join these rows together, and then I'll be able to show what it looks like after it's done. All right, so here we go. I have all 4 of these joined together, and actually what I decided to do was I decided that I really, really liked how this looked with it being kind of these chevrons, I guess. So it's almost like it's chevrons or kind of like arrows going this way and then, you know, like that way. This is long enough that I can just go ahead and do it this way. And then it just means that the other side of it looks this way here where this one's sticking out. So it just means that I'm going to trim it. And I think it'll still end up being about 41 inches. I think that works out very well. And then another thing that I've done is on these parts where it's white fabric, I have decided that I could see just a little bit of ghosting of a dark fabric against that white fabric on the other side. So especially like this one, it really kind of looks that way. So the way that I can fix that is I just end up releasing those stitches and then I just cut it up at the angle like that, and that will make it so that this blue isn't actually poking through to the other side of that. And then on this side, I have also the same thing. So I'm just going to do the same thing right here. I'm just going to trim that away. And then I don't have to worry about it. So I might as well just line these up together like this. I think that works. And then I can just whack it in one go. Okay. All right. So that gets everything nice and even. I'm going to go ahead and finish this out, and then I will be back for the big reveal. And now for the moment that you've been waiting for. And this is how it looks. It looks so beautiful. I absolutely love how this turned out. And for the back side, I decided to choose this nice canvas wave pattern that I have. And so I think that goes very nicely with what I've done on the front here. I've done some stitching where I've done just kind of some loose wavy patterns. And so I think this turned out really, really well. Now, if you do cut it to where you have it figured out if you're going to make it more of this chevron, or if you are going to have it be the braids that are not needing a matching seam, then you can have this end up being about 43 inches, I think. This ended up being about 41 inches because I cut off about an inch off of either end, and that works fine for me. I think 41 inches is perfect for a table runner. And this is 16 inches wide because these are 4.5 inches wide. So if you do want to make this bigger, all you have to do is just add more of the chips, and that will make it longer. You can add more rows, so you can make more braid rows, and that will make it wider. So this is very versatile. You can make this into a crib quilt by doubling it. You could make it into a throw by making a little bit longer on the braid, and then maybe doing 12 of these instead of just 4. I hope I've inspired you to take a different look and approach to your chips, and you can come up with something absolutely stunning.